Audio Jungle.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello all my dear students. How are you today? Fine? Nice? I hope so. Today I'm going to talk about political and economic reform in 19th century Britain. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Is the oft-quoted beginning to Charles Dickens' work A Tale of Two Cities. Dickens, a British writer who was active during 19th century Victorian Britain, is often considered the writer who best captured that particular period of British history. That line gets at the heart of 19th century British society, perhaps better than any other. For some, like industrialists and the aristocracy, life couldn't seemingly not get any better. For others, however, like the working poor, the quality of life was possibly at its lowest levels in modern history. Not everyone was willing to accept this fact of a British life. Organizers, from fledgling labor unions to grassroots activities to members of parliament, agitated for a change and an improvement in the overall quality of life in 19th century Britain. This lesson will detail the results of several of those reform movements. Most of the reform movements that cropped up in Great Britain in the 19th century were in reaction to the extreme social change caused by the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution impacted British society far quicker than the rest of Europe, as the Industrial Revolution largely began on the island nation. Indeed, in the second half of the 18th century, factories sprang up in many British cities, driven by the invention and the innovation that made the high volume production of everyday goods possible. Everything from household goods to industrial products was now produced in incredible quantities at a fraction of the former price. The factories and the innovations that spurred this burst of industrial productivity required an enormous amount of men, women, and children to man the machines used in production. As a result, Great Britain underwent a major demographic shift in only a couple generations, as entire families flocked to cities where the factories were based. Whereas in 1800, most of Britain still resided in small farming communities, by the 1850s over half of the British populace lived in cities and worked in industrial production. These cities were often ill-equipped to deal with the rapid influx of people. The rapid influx of people and sewage and water systems were taxed to the breaking point as families set up makeshift dwellings and overpopulated what housing existed. To make matters worse, working conditions were little better inside the factories themselves. Workers often toiled for long 14 to 16-hour shifts at dangerous machines, where one small slip could cost a worker a finger, a leg, or even his life. The children often worked in these factories as well, doing odd jobs such as cleaning or doing highly dangerous work in small spaces where adults could not fit. For some, The dangerous working conditions and deplorable living standards large portions of the British population now endured were too much to bear. Early labor leaders gained some sympathy in progressive parliamentarians, though any government interference in the factories was met with vehement opposition by the factories' owners and industrialists. Nevertheless, several laws throughout the 19th century addressed working conditions. The earliest acts regarded child labor. Many poor children under the age of 10 worked in British factories in the early 19th century, considered pauper apprentices according to British law. For example, in the cotton industry, where small and nimble fingers were needed for the intricate work, it is estimated that 1/5 of laborers were under the age of 13. Early legislation, fostered by the wealthy factory owner and parliamentarian Robert Peel, encouraged better conditions for children in factories, as well as preventing apprentices under 21 to work longer than 12-hour shifts. The first measure enrolled into improving conditions was the 1833 Factory Act. The Factory Act forbade any factory owner from working children under the age of 16, longer than 10 hours per day. In addition, children under the age of 13 were to receive at least 2 hours of education each day. Most importantly, the Factory Act was the first parliamentary measure to provide for factory inspectors to roam the British cities and factories, ensuring that factory owners complied. After the Factory Act, legislation continued to moderately improve the working conditions of the working poor, especially children. In the 1800s, legislation that forced factory owners to fence off dangerous machinery was enforced, and the hours children were allowed to work was reduced, and their required educational periods enlarged. By 1891, British Parliament had outlawed all labor by children under the age of 11 and required most children to at least attend a primary school. What about political economic reform? Working conditions and child labor was not the only focus of reform in 19th century Britain. Indeed, even though the conditions of the working class were deplorable by modern standards, the wages the factories paid created an entirely new class of people. A class who now wanted a say in the political process from which they had long been shut off. That's all, my dear students. I have now come to the end of my presentation. I have now come to the end of my video. Please study hard, do your best. Thank you for listening and watching. Assalamu alaikum.